Well, thank you, everyone. Happy St. Patrick's Day on this blustery Friday in Minnesota. I'm Dan Cohen, the Chief Performance Officer at Human Powered Health, and I am accompanied by Chris Lundstrom, who is in Finland, apparently, with the Northern Lights. But I'll let Chris do a quick introduction, and then we can get started.
Hey everyone, yeah, I'm Chris Lundstrom. I'm the head coach of Minnesota Distance Elite Postcollegiate Running Group here in the Twin Cities. I also am in the School of Kinesiology at the University of Minnesota. So I teach exercise science and training theory there, and just happy to see everybody here today.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, so we have a packed agenda, and I know that there are some questions that were asked, and we want to make sure that we have time to address those questions. So we do have a few slides to run through, really as a level set, more science specific questions and content, really setting the framework, and then we'll get into more specifics around training intervals, etc. But we do want to spend about 10 to 15 minutes going through the questions that were asked. And I'll also say that, because we do only have a half hour, we might not get to all the questions. After this call, we'll send out my direct email, and I would encourage anyone who has additional questions to reach out to me directly so that we can get your questions asked and we can distribute those to Chris as well. So let's get going. So we're going to talk today about the very basic principle of stress versus rest, applying the right amount of stimulus so that your body's going to adapt positively. Training intensities and the energy systems, very, very important to have a very good foundation of what the energy systems are so that you can then apply that to your training. Periodizing a training program, flowing through the different elements of a season or a year to ensure that you're getting the right amount of stress and positive adaptation. And then we'll go into some specific workouts for performance, and then some race day strategies. And then we'll get into the questions. So I'm going to turn it over to Chris to talk about stress versus rest and some of the other components.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, so this is just the basic question of what happens when you do a workout. So for example, this morning I did a strength training session, and you can see here in this chart what happens after a workout. A few hours later, you're actually less able to perform than you were before the workout. So you're in what's called the alarm phase here, where your body is having a stress response and needs some time to recover and adapt. So that process takes some time. You can see the red line traces your sort of ability to perform exercise. And it doesn't matter the type of exercise, could be a long endurance effort, could be a strength training session. But the idea is we get into that section labeled C there, which is super compensation, where you're now at a higher level than you were before you did the workout in the first place. And then, of course, over time, if you don't do another workout, you start to lose that fitness again. So that's just what a single workout looks like. Next slide. So when we think about planning our training, we want to think about timing of workouts. If, for example, I work out once every couple of weeks and I get a good workout in, but I don't do anything in between, I'm going to slowly over time have a decline in my fitness level. It's just not enough training stimulus. So that's what you can see here on the left side is a detraining situation where you're waiting too long to get that next workout in, and you're actually slowly over time losing fitness. On the right-hand side, this is what we see with a lot of endurance athletes who think more is better, got to pack in more training, and they're starting to do a hard workout before they're fully recovered from that previous workout. And over time, their fitness level declines because they're in an overtrained state. They're not allowing enough recovery between workouts. And so you might be able to get away with that once or twice, but if you continue to follow that pattern, your fitness level will decline due to inadequate recovery. Next. So this is what our goal here is: optimal recovery time, getting that acute alarm response where you decline a little bit briefly, but then a super compensation effect, and taking advantage of that while you're still in that level where you're above the fitness where you were before. You're performing another workout that's going to, again, bump you up to that next level. So that's our goal in putting training together. Next slide. All right, so different types of workouts. So certainly the body has lots of different ways it can adapt, and we want to take advantage of all the body can do. So we have three main ways of delivering energy to our body. The first is the ATP PCR system. ATP, you can think of that as the fuel that is needed for any muscular contraction. So just sitting, resting here, we've got about enough ATP and phosphocreatine to fuel about 10 to 12 seconds of very high intensity exercise. So if we were to sprint, we would use this energy source, but it'd be pretty quick to get exhausted. In order to stimulate this energy system, we need to train at near maximal intensity, and we also need long recoveries between bouts. So sometimes people will say, oh, I did a 3-minute sprint or something like that. Well, that's not a true sprint. We want to tax this energy system. We need to be at truly maximal effort or near it, and allow lots of recovery in between work bouts. The second is the anaerobic glycolytic, or sometimes termed the lactate system. And this is kind of a mid-range. People who are running in 800 meters, for example, really use this energy system. So it's work bouts, roughly 30 seconds up to 2 minutes at a pretty high effort. So you're working in an anaerobic system, you're getting out of breath while you're doing the workout. And how much recovery to take can vary. It doesn't need to be as long as for an ATP PCR effort, but you are going to be significantly out of breath. So at least probably a 1-to-1 work to rest ratio, maybe more rest than work. Oxidative or aerobic energy system. Good news. If you exhaust those other two systems, your aerobic system is able to pick up the slack. It does deliver energy at a slower rate. So this is why if we have to rely on the aerobic system, we're going to be going a little bit slower. But the good news is, as long as we have oxygen, we're able to do aerobic metabolism. That's what we rely on day to day for our everyday function. To train the aerobic system, there's a wide range we could do. Basically anything from 2 minutes up and continuous or interval based, and at a 70 to 90% of max effort is a general rule. Using heart rate can be a really useful measure here to basically get the right intensity for the particular type of workout. All right.
Yeah, and I'll also just tag on to what Chris said. This is really important to have a good foundational understanding of the energy systems, because at the end of the day, that's where you're going to get the highest level of performance, is to have a good understanding of these energy systems and then apply it to your training. Oftentimes, as Chris mentioned earlier, it's not so much making sure people are doing enough intensity, for example. It's making sure that they're slowing down to really impact and develop the oxidative system, for example, because you're going to be able to utilize your fat as fuel before you start going into your stored carbohydrates, etc. So I'd encourage you to really understand, read up on the energy systems, and then apply your training accordingly. If you're doing a marathon, for example, you basically any long distance running, you're going to be doing the majority of your work here in the oxidative area. So
Yeah, and this just shows kind of over the time course, if you were to work out at high intensity, where your energy utilization is going to come from. So you can see it's a pretty short time scale here. 30 seconds, within 30 seconds, your ATP CP system is pretty much exhausted. And your anaerobic glycolytic system will take up the slack. But after, 3-4 minutes, that's also dropping off pretty dramatically. The aerobic system, however, is going to continue to function. And so for those longer distance events, the aerobic system is really where the vast majority of focus needs to be spent. Not to say you should ignore the others, because everybody has those capabilities and you might as well develop them as well. But the aerobic system for most distance events is the key.
All right. So now let's get into designing an individual training program. If you're looking at an entire year, it's really important that you periodize your training. And when I mean periodized, that's just a fancy way of saying that you're breaking up your training based on where you are within a season. And if you look at periodization models, there could be 4 phases, there could be 5 phases, but to keep it really easy, think of it as you have an off season, which most people are in right now, especially in Minnesota. You're going to be doing very specific training during your off season. And then you're going to move to more of pre-season, where you're prepping, you're doing more race simulations to get ready for your goal races. And then you'll have in season, that'll look very different than what you're doing in the off season. And then you can look at it from a postseason perspective. And if you're able to break it into phases and then structure your training accordingly, you're going to get the right amount of stress and rest so that you can positively adapt. So just quickly going through this, your training plan is going to be based on multiple different factors: age, how much time you have available, your capacity to adapt, not just physically, but mentally. We know racing can be very difficult. So do you have the mental fortitude to push through? Your biomechanics, how you're running, what kind of shoes you're wearing, and then your body's ability to absorb the training and avoid that overtraining state that Chris mentioned earlier. And then how you're recovering and making sure that you're incorporating the right amount of recovery into your training is of utmost importance. So more specifically, training principles. So the aerobic development, that is where you're going to get the most bang for your buck in terms of long distance running, really focusing on, a heart rate of, 65 to 85% of your max. That'll give you the right amount of stimulus to, really enhance your ability to develop ATP effectively, utilizing fat as fuel. You really want to make sure that you're changing your volumes and your intensity gradually. If you do both, for example, and get really excited and you are feeling good and you decide to go out for a 2-hour run and then throw in lots of intensity as well, that very well might be too much for your body to handle, and you could run into some issues. Pay attention to muscle strength and function. Very, very, very important. Strength training is one of those easy things to just kind of push to the side so you can get your additional run volume in. But at the end of the day, your muscles are what are taking the brunt of the force. And if your muscles are not developed enough to handle that, that's when you run into issues around ligament, tendon issues, stress fractures, all those things that you want to avoid as a runner. So at the end of the day, always listen to your body and avoid pushing through minor aches and pains that if you address right away, we'll be fine. But if you keep pushing through, that's when the stress fractures, that's when other issues can occur. Interval training is your bread and butter when it comes to performance. And we do have some specific information and workouts on examples of how to structure interval training. And as it says here, it's high risk, high reward. So again, interval training should be structured in a way that you're stimulating the right energy system, the right intensity, but you're also incorporating the right amount of rest so that your body can positively adapt. And, for an example would be on this next slide right here would be a sample workouts. So I'm just going to skip to that. But so for example, if you're training for a mile, you might structure interval workouts in this particular manner: 4x200, 4x400, 4x200. You're going to run those very aggressively. You're going to rest a minute after your 200s, 2 minutes after your 400s. And that should be enough to really, again, provide that stimulus and that rest so that you can positively adapt. Another example would be if you're doing a 10K. If you're really training hard to PR in, let's say, getting gear coming up here, you might do 3x1 miles or 5x 1,000 meters. And you would do 3 to 4 minutes rest after your mile repeats, 2 to 3 minutes rest after your 1,000s. And you're going to want to go at about your 10Ks or slightly above. Marathon, long distance. So a 2-hour run where you really want to focus on quality over quantity. You're going to do a 2-hour run, but you're going to do more of like a fartlek style run where you're, running 3 minutes at a fairly brisk pace. And then you're going to, jog easy for 2 minutes to let your body adapt. And then you're going to do that again. And you'll just structure that for 60 minutes over your 2-hour run. So that way you're getting some race pace. You're teaching your body to handle the the fluctuations during a race that can occur. If, for example, if you're going up a hill and you want to train your body to go up that hill, crest that hill, and then continue on. These types of workouts will really help your body adapt accordingly during the longer run. And I'm going to go back to this slide here. So prescription basics. We talked about this in the previous slide or 2 slides ago, but it's going to be adjusted based off of where you are in your season. So for example, if you're in your off season, it's going to look much different than if you're in race mode. And then also the purpose of the workout. Volume and intensity can be manipulated and adapted accordingly so that you are you're getting the right amount of stimulus to improve your performance. As it relates to intensity, you can measure intensity in multiple different ways. Effort-based, so RPE, essentially going by feel. Heart rate, which is an effective way to measure intensity, although it is highly variable, depending upon if you're hydrated, you're dehydrated, if you've got enough rest, lots of different factors. So if you are doing a marathon, for example, you're doing more longer distance running, just be aware that heart rate can and very well likely, be highly variable. If you're going out for a long run, you start to get dehydrated. You may experience something called cardiac drift, where because you're dehydrated, your blood is becoming more viscous, and your heart has to work harder to pump out the oxygenated blood. That's why you're going to see a higher heart rate. Doesn't mean necessarily you need to slow down. Again, go by how you feel, and then pace and speed, right? You're either going 7-minute pace or you're not. So if you think about it that way, pace is a very, very good way to measure intensity. So I encourage you to play around with those variables and see what works best for you. All right, and then I'll quickly go through this and then we'll get into the questions. So psychological skills, very important. We all know that racing can be, is incredibly fun. It can be incredibly challenging, and having the right mental strategies to combat any negative thoughts during the race are very valuable. We do work with a very specific sports psychologist who's excellent. There's lots of content you can find, on the internet that can provide, different ways to combat any challenges that you might face during a race. So have fun with that. And then have a race plan. So know exactly what pace you want to do and you want to aim for. Really understand your fueling strategy. We can do a whole segment. In fact, we do have another segment coming up here on nutrition and fueling, where we're going to bring in our registered dietitian to talk to you all about different nutritional strategies. And then, of course, all your gear and everything else, make sure you have that all ready to go for your particular event. Okay. So now we want to get into some specific questions. And I'm just going to read off the first one. So strength training. How many days of strength training should you be doing versus your run days? And when should you do your strength training? Should it be on a day that you actually do a run, or should it be a day that you're not running, you're doing more cross training? So Chris, let me pass it over to you as a first take.
Yeah, I think as a general rule, I would say 2 days a week is probably a good amount where you're going to be able to make some good gains, but also not be overstressing your other, interfering with your other work. It does depend on how much you do. Some people like to do split, where they do their upper body one day, their lower body the next. In my experience, most runners don't love to strength train that much. So we do a full body workout twice a week, maybe once a week, even if we're in more of a maintenance phase. But as far as days of the week, what we like to do is do them later in the day on a harder day, so that our hard days are truly hard days. We might not perform as well in the strength training session as we could have if we were fresh, but given that that's sort of meant to support our running, we're not as concerned about that. So I would say either later in the day on a hard day, or maybe the next day if you have 2 days that are easier in between harder sessions. So that's how we would structure it.
Yeah, and I agree 100%. And just to reiterate, strength training is something that if you're not doing, you absolutely should start incorporating that into your regimen. It's just something that's going to improve your performance, provide more longevity to your running career, and help develop your musculature so that you're able to endure the rigors of racing. So in terms of what type of strength training, being a runner, an endurance athlete, focusing more on functional strength training, meaning that you're not going in to do the traditional, put the squat, go up to the squat rack and do a bunch of heavy weight. You might do some single leg squats, utilize the, stretch bands, doing body weight exercises, more core, more of that structural effort versus the, Olympic style lifting that is more applicable to like a sprinter or a football player. So, again, full body, but make sure that it's more functional and really there to ensure that you're ready to go for your racing and your training, and your muscles and your connective tissues are all dialed in. A detailed description of how to integrate interval training into one's exercise routine. So again, Chris, I know we talked about this just briefly ago, but let me pass it over to you just for a little more color commentary on how to structure interval training.
Sure. I think in general, approach would be to do 2 interval sessions per week. And then one of them, I would say, should be really targeted to whatever your goal race is. So if you're, training for a 10K or a 5K or a half marathon, whatever that distance is, doing intervals that are, at that particular pace or intensity, 1 day a week, really focusing on dialing that in. And then the second day could be more of a secondary workout where you're doing some additional intervals that might support that type of work. So, for example, if you're training for something shorter, like a mile or a 5K, you probably still want to do some of that aerobic development, but that longer interval work as well. So maybe some threshold paced workouts, something like that. But I would say, 2 days a week with a couple of days in between would be a good structure. And one of them being very specific to the race that you're training for, and the other one being to support that work to kind of address any kind of areas that you need to improve personally. So if you really need to develop that aerobic side, doing those longer intervals. If it's speed that you really lack and need to develop, doing some shorter, higher intensity stuff while you're training for a longer race. So that would be how I would structure it. And knowing that one of those workouts is really the key one for the week. And, it can be more of one where you're going to go a little bit harder and a little more to the well. And the other one where maybe you want to finish making sure that you had a little more in you, you didn't empty the tank, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's great. And I'll just tag on to that. Make sure that your intervals are quality. That is important. And make sure that your last few repetitions are your best ones, so that you're not taxing yourself so much on the first few, and then the last couple you're just slogging along. Focus on quality, focus on form and technique when you're doing these harder intervals. But don't just go out and run them just to run them. Have a purpose and make sure that your last few are your best. And that also helps with confidence as well. Best or favorite activity to do on your non-running days. So I'll start with this one. So I am more of a triathlete, and so that obviously gives me multiple modalities to train. I particularly do a lot of cycling. I'm not doing a lot of swimming right now, but I need to get going on that. But I'm incorporating those specifically as a runner. Use whatever you do, whether it's cycling or swimming or elliptical. Use those as ways to recover, refresh, get some good aerobic base in there. Not something that's going to really tax your system, so that your key runs and later on in the week are affected because you went too hard on the bike, for example. So use them more as cross training. You can get a lot of benefit from, for example, cycling or swimming or whatever other cross activities you're doing. Just make sure that they're moderate. They're not something that's going to affect your quality workouts during your runs. Any thoughts on that, Chris?
Yeah, I think just whatever you need to address your weaknesses. I'll give myself as an example. I started rock climbing recently as a way to one, try to keep up with my kids, but two, I've got 25 years plus of going in a straight line and not using my muscles in a variety of ways. So just for functional strength throughout the body, and it's fun. So I would say do something that's enjoyable. That would be the main thing. And like Dan said, don't overdo it.
Yeah.
It's meant to be just a little additional recovery. So take it easy.
So now we're at time, but I'm going to attempt to do one more question here, and then we can wrap up, and then encourage you to send me an email directly with any additional questions. Happy to jump on a call, have a conversation. So in training for a half or even a full marathon, should I be changing my training schedule significantly other than adding for example, a long run one time a week or every 2 weeks. Currently this individual is doing about 30 to 35 miles a week. So Chris, any thoughts on, in particularly the long run and how to structure that into a marathon regimen?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is making sure that you have enough rest and recovery before and after the long run. So think of the long run for a marathoner as your main workout of the week. So in the example we gave, we're including a 60-minute quality session within the long run. So you really, to do that, for example, on a Sunday, and then come back and do another workout, if you're used to doing 2 interval workouts during the week, that might be too much. So sometimes it's just thinking that's my primary workout, and I've got another workout kind of midweek that we might do in addition. So I would say the biggest difference is adjusting the rest of your week to make sure that you're recovered for that long run. But otherwise, a lot of the same types of training can be really effective, and you don't want to, lose that efficiency and speed that you get from shorter workouts as well.
Yep. Excellent. All right. Well, we are at time. We covered a lot of material. I want to thank you for taking time out of your day on this St. Patrick's Day to get some information regarding run training and how to structure workouts. Again, encourage you to send me a note directly. I'm happy to answer any questions. I can forward them on to Chris as well. Ultimately just listen to your bodies, make sure you're getting enough rest, you're providing the right amount of stimulus to positively adapt, and more importantly, just have fun with your running and in any training that you're doing. All right. Well, thank you very much. Enjoy the weekend, everyone.
Dan, do you want to forward ahead to that last slide? I think that has your contact info on it too.
Yes. Here we go.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, everyone. Take care.